Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. You're here at BRIC. BRIC is the largest presenter of free cultural programming in Brooklyn, and it's one of the largest in New York City. We present and incubate works by artists and media makers who reflect the diversity that surrounds us. And BRIC's programs reach hundreds of thousands of people each year. So this is one of our BRIC Media Talks. They're a regular series that we do. We do them every few months. And our focus tonight is on freelance media makers. The three wonderful people to my left here, who I'm going to introduce in one minute, work as freelance filmmakers, editors, cinematographers, in a variety of different capacities here in the city. And we're going to talk tonight about the ins and outs of doing that, finding inspiration, and staying afloat in this crazy world of New York City. So thank you so much for coming. We're going to get right into it. Our first panelist is Jeanette Sears. Jeanette Sears is a queer New York-based freelance cinematographer, filmmaker, and editor for various short films and documentaries. They have a particular interest in LGBTQ projects and narrative storytelling and are very active in that community. They're currently a video editor and shooter for Group 9 Media and editor for the Astria Lesbian Foundation for Justice. Jeanette also served as the programs director and an instructor for the I Was There film workshops, channeling a strong interest in working with veteran populations through filmmaking. She's a native of Ohio and an MFA graduate from City College of New York. Represent, fellow graduate. More about their work and projects can be seen at searsphotovideo.com. We also have Hannah Jayanti, who's a documentary filmmaker. She directs, produces, shoots, and edits. And her current work, she lives in a variety of places for months, giving voices to the smaller stories that surround us, but which we rarely celebrate. Recent grants for Hannah include the New York State Council on the Arts, the Jerome Foundation, Tribeca New Media Fund, Puffin Foundation, Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation. And she screened at the New Yorker Festival, Tribeca, Storyscapes, the Smithsonian, the Museum of the Moving Image, New York Public Library, and others. She's a member of Women Make Movies, and she's passionate about making filmmaking accessible and teaches free, low-cost filmmaking classes in Brooklyn, here at BRIC, and in New York City. And last we have Randy Wilkins. Randy is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning writer, director, and editor from the Bronx. As a director, Randy's enjoyed success with his award-winning digital series Docket 32357. He recently completed season 2 of that show, while in development for his first feature film script, Pray for a Little More Spring. Randy helmed the ESPN 30 for 30 Lil Spike Joint 8632, chronicling the controversial decision between Roy Jones Jr. and Park Si-hoon in the light, middle, heavyweight globe medal match at the 1988 Summer Olympics. And he recently served as lead editor on Spike Lee joints, including She's Gotta Have It for Netflix, the Emmy Award-winning What is the Triangle, a Spike Lee Orange and Blue Skies joint for the MSG Network, Two Fists Up for ESPN, Rodney King for Netflix, and Does Sweet Blood of Jesus. And you can read more about Randy's work at pamson.com. Okay, we did it, guys. We got through that part. Thank you so much for coming. This is really, really exciting. Let me just get rid of my clipboard. Thank you very much. I'll give it to you at the end. So I want to start off just by getting a little bit into how did you guys end up working in media? Hannah, do you want to go first? Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into the world of filmmaking and working on films and stuff like that?
Yeah. So for me, it wasn't a plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think. I was on very, very sort of different tracks, but I moved here to do an MFA at SVA in photo and video. My background is in photo, which I sort of had never taken seriously professionally, but then I just found myself sort of compulsively doing it, so I decided I'd apply for an MFA. And then after a year, I dropped out, and then I started working, and I found that was the best. I started making my first documentary then, and I found it really, really difficult, but there was also a certain thing of it that just totally took me in, and since then, that has been what I've been doing.
What was the subject of the first documentary?
It was about a children's book that was written in New York in the 60s called The Phantom Tollbooth.
Oh, okay. I read that growing up.
Yeah.
Jeanette, how'd you get started?
Mine was a little bit more of a plan. In college, I went to be an engineer in my undergrad and realized I didn't like math. But I really liked watching and making movies, which is something that I had messed around with in high school, and sort of decided to go for it. I did my undergrad in Ohio and then decided I either wanted to go to California or New York, and ended up here in New York. And
why New York?
to be honest, I did
Please.
get into I did get into a school in California as well, but it was closer to home, and I had never really been to New York, but it seemed like more of the pace that I wanted to be involved in, and the I don't know, I felt like you could do different kinds of work than just trying to do the studio thing in LA, and that was I've never lived in LA, so I don't know the difference between the two, but I just really liked the idea of New York.
Cool.
And went for it, and I've been working since.
And how long have you been freelance?
Full freelance has only been about 2 years now.
2 years.
Yeah.
Randy?
I had a tryout with the Kansas City Royals to play professional baseball. That was the summer before my senior year in college. So I was fully expecting to play baseball and drop out of school. So I had to take an art class to graduate my senior year, just in case I didn't drop out. So it was a film class that I took. I immediately realized that I had some kind of aptitude for it. I didn't think that you could make films like as a regular person from the Bronx. I just thought it was like magic at that point. I didn't know that it was accessible at that level. And then I ended up blowing my knee out and wasn't able to play baseball anymore. And I had to leave school, actually. I ended up dropping out of school because I had to heal up, and I had 2 surgeries. And then when I came back to finish my studies, it was the same year that I came back when 9/11 happened. So I finished my degree, got my degree, but I didn't want to come back home. So I came up with this idea to do a documentary on a black-owned barbershop in a predominantly white neighborhood. So I did that. It did pretty well. It brought the communities together. The new president of the school hired me to be a filmmaker in residence. He just made up a job for me. I made another documentary, and then I met Spike, and I was his tour guide while he was there. He was there for 2 days, so I got a chance to really pick his brain. And
Where was that?
Franklin and Marshall in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So I was around Spike for about 2 days. He saw the second documentary I had made, and when he was leaving, I asked him, what's a word of advice that you could give me? And he said, you need to learn how to make narrative films. And I said, okay, cool. All right, whatever. And then he said, if you want to go to NYU, I'll give you a recommendation. So I obviously took him up on the offer. Ended up going to Tisch and got my degree there, and I started working with him at the same time. And then it just went from there. Before the NYU opportunity, I wasn't sure if I was going to pursue film. I think I was probably going to go to law school and try to be a sports agent. But when the opportunity came up to go to Tisch, I took it and took the leap. So,
And when did you finish at Tisch?
2009.
And you've been freelance since then, right? More or less?
More or less. I mean, you could say I started when I worked on Inside Man in 2004. So I guess that was like my first introduction to freelance work. But I was still in school. So I guess if you go by 2009, it's been about 9 years.
So, which leads me to my next question, and this is for all you guys, but we'll start with Randy. When you got out of school, was there a moment where you were like, well, was there a moment when you decided you wanted to go the freelance route, or was it just kind of what happened? For all of you, I mean, does it feel like it's a decision, or does it feel like it's just the evolution for you?
Well, it kind of just happened because I was already working. I mean, I was doing a whole bunch of stuff with Spike by that point. So by that time, I had built up a lot of relationships with different people. I started working on things that were outside of Spike. It was just the natural evolution of things. Just so it was the most important thing for me in terms of freelance was that when I was in school, I didn't just focus on directing. I focused on learning like an actual technical skill so that I could stay in the industry. Because there were a lot of people that I went to school with who were just like, I'm going to be a director. I'm going to be the next big thing. And it didn't happen right away. And they didn't have anything to fall back on. So they weren't in the industry. They weren't making connections that way. They weren't able to meet producers or meet studio execs. They weren't really able to do anything because they weren't in the industry. They had to take a job that was outside of it.
Because they didn't have like a skill like editing or shooting or something like that.
So I was able to learn shooting and editing at NYU, and then I just kind of just transitioned into different jobs so I could make sure that I was around the thing that I wanted to do ultimately.
How about for either of you?
Mine was also pretty organic. I had, right out of school though, I had a sales job, which was absolutely miserable. And so I just started doing stuff on the side. I started doing weddings on the weekends, trying to keep up with doing all of the technical things. Really, I love shooting. And trying to do that, and kept in contact with people that I had gone to school with, and actually got my longest position through Liam with an organization. And when that sort of faded out, I had kept the other freelance work that I was doing during that, and it sort of helped transition out of that into a full freelance.
When you were kind of keeping those, like when you were working full time at I Was There Films, and you were doing the other stuff, was there ever a moment where you're like, I want to leave this other stuff, but felt like you had to keep doing it because...
Leaving which stuff?
The freelance stuff that you were doing, like shooting weddings and stuff. Did you ever go like, oh, I have this full-time job, I'll just stick with this?
No, because I've always liked shooting and editing enough that it was sort of always the opposite. Like, how can I get out of this day gig to be able to do the things that I want, to be able to freelance, so...
Hannah, how about for you?
For me, I mean, it didn't feel like a conscious choice. After I left grad school, I worked managing a photography studio. And two things happened. One is my boss was really mean. And so that really helped. It really helps when you get really dissatisfied with your current situation. I actually think dissatisfaction can be a really wonderful thing sometimes. So, and then also I had started making my own film, and then I did a Kickstarter. And so I had some money, but I actually went full-time and then part-time and then quit.
Oh.
And I think the little part-time in between can be a great, I think that is one of the...
Like a transition?
Yeah, that is if that is an option, I think that is a big piece of advice I would give, is that if you can keep something that's a bit stable, and I think there's two reasons. One is financially, and then secondly, when you're given this just expanse of time, unstructured time, it can sometimes be paralyzing. And so to have something that is confining it and structuring a little bit makes you use that other time so well.
So speaking of time, back when I was freelance-ish, worked here but not full-time, and I wouldn't get here till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I would have an expanse of time. And I'd be really good at staying in bed, and I'd be really bad at getting things done. So my question to you guys is, folks whose gigs change, that might unexpectedly, something that you've got lined up might fall through for a week or a day or a month at a time. How do you keep yourself from just having an expanse of time?
Having very long-term projects.
Okay.
So I'm working on a film. I'm in my 4th year on my feature documentary right now. So that helps because you can always keep working on it.
Right.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
I know that's not a terribly practical solution.
No, but so when you have downtime, you just kind of go okay, I got to get this shot, or I have to get these releases.
For now, because I think for me, because I'm working on that and 2 other films, everything is about how I can buy time to work on those. And I think that does help a lot. But I think there's also, I think I would love to know your guys' opinion on this, but I think I don't think the freelance lifestyle is a great fit for everybody. I think for some people it's really stressful, and sometimes you can just spend time hustling and making money and trying to make it work, and you don't actually have the freedom that you think you would want. And I think I don't know. I think about this is a slightly tangential story, but I think about this a little bit with my sister. My sister and I, we grew up in the similar situation, obviously, because we're sisters. And it was very unstructured in my home. And so she has gone to work for the State Department. She is in the most structured place possible. And my lifestyle sounds horrible to her, absolutely horrifying. The fact that I don't know, that I don't have benefits, that I go from insecurity, that it goes project-based, that just sounds awful, you know? And I'm always oh, that's a great thing to remember, that it's a particular type of lifestyle, you know?
Person that can do it.
Yeah.
How about
or
for you?
to.
Or wants to.
Yeah.
How about for you guys when you have an expanse of time? I love that term.
For me, it's unless it's a really long amount of time where I'm concerned I'm not making money and have to pay student loans and stuff. A lot of times if I'm not working on my own project, I'm doing things that have absolutely nothing to do with film.
Okay.
It's important for me to have like a balanced life. So even if I have this expansive time, like that can be used for other things that I have interest in. So whatever those things are, like I begin to focus on those things as well, because it's a refresher from film. Like film in of itself is stressful. Trying to get your projects off the ground is stressful. So I like to focus on things that have absolutely nothing to do with the career that I've chosen, just because I might be a little different in the sense that I don't let film consume me. I'm not thinking about it 24/7. I have, as Liam knows, a very passionate love for sports. So I focus on
And
things
Star
like
Wars.
that, and Star Wars. But I try to focus on things that are not related to my career, so that when I come back to it, I have an energy for it. I'm not stressed out. I'm not burned out. And then I can put all that energy back into the things that I need to put it back into. So sometimes I welcome the expanse of time, because now I get to focus on things that I wouldn't be able to if I was working, especially if you work for somebody like Spike, you don't have a life. Like when I did She's Gotta Have It, even though they were in production, we were working 20 straight days. And they were like 12 to 14-hour days. So you don't have a chance to do anything like laundry, get a haircut, nothing. So for me, that extra amount of time is precious. So I try to take advantage of it as much as I can, even if that means sleeping in and getting like extra sleep. Like that's important to me. So
It's interesting you say that, because I think that there seems like there's a tendency among people who are freelance to be like, oh, film all the time, and it can get exhausting to be that way, but I think also to be around that can be exhausting.
when I was, I need a break from film sometimes. Like I need to do something else. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think echoing a little bit of both of you, when I do have free time, it is trying to focus on whatever creative projects I have on my own. And when that doesn't work out, there's days where I just need to have a checklist of all these things completely unrelated to film that I need to get done. And it's so satisfying when you can just like go through those things, all these things that you haven't caught up on, even if it's just like cleaning your house. Like, I don't know why, but for me, that's like therapeutic in a way when I'm not focused on work, and I can really just like check off all these little things that take a full day to get done. Just trying to like stay organized with that. So when you don't have a project going on or you don't have work that day, that when you go back to it, you don't feel like you're swimming in all this stuff that's not related to work, that you can get that done.
So I hope this doesn't happen, but Randy sort of alluded to this. When you have those moments where it's like, ooh, I don't really have a lot lined up, what do you do? Like, do you have a drawing board that you go back to? Do you have people you call? Do you have you been in those situations? Like, what do you try? What do you do in those red alert moments, or those they're going to be down the line?
One of the, I don't know if this is an answer, but one of the tricky things about freelancing is you do have to do this sort of weird planning thing, because you don't get paid for a while. And so you have to sort of like have to have things, sort of like a sense of how things are going to be for a few months. I know a lot of freelancers who don't work like that, and I feel like they're really worried about money. Like they're in sort of a constant state of anxiety all the time, because you have to act like you're not going to get paid for like 2 months, because you usually get paid at the end of a project, and then it usually takes a month. This is just like rote, like practical freelance stuff. So for me, I'm always trying to think a few months ahead, and it does become, I'm often juggling things where I'm like, I take something and then something else comes up, and then I don't want to do that thing anymore, and then, and you're like, sort of, I would say the big thing for me, I don't know what your guys' life, but it's like, you have to be comfortable with constantly readjusting. There's like, very rarely can you just be like, okay, that's what I can expect. Like, you have to just constantly readjust. And I think you have to like that. I think, yeah, or
like it?
I must, right?
Okay.
I mean, like, otherwise it would be just insanity.
I must like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think it's okay to have a certain standard of work that you will be willing to do, though. Mm-hmm. Like, I know I'm in a special situation because I met somebody at a certain level, but even then, like, even when I'm not working with Spike, I've made sure that I went for jobs that I wasn't waiting 2 months to get paid. Like, to me, if it's possible to do so, I'm not saying that it's easy or that's always like somebody's option, but like I had a certain standard after a while that it was like, well, if this is a situation where I have to wait 3 months to get paid, I'm not doing it. Like, my value and like how I view myself, I deserve to get paid on time.
What are your alarm bells for getting paid? Like, if you're like, oh, this is going to be hard to get, you know what I mean?
I try to do research on people. I try to see what other project they've done before. I try to get an idea of what their budget is. I try to find out however I can, like, how they operate, because they've obviously done stuff in the past, and I just try to do as much reconnaissance as possible. And it's also like, if you talk to them, you can kind of get a vibe of like how they operate and how they respect crew members. A lot of it for me is, if you respect me enough to work on this, you respect me enough to pay me on time. And if that's not the case, I'm not working on it. You know, I think you have to have a certain acceptance. Some things you can play along with, and then some things you can't. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't think that it's fair to wait 3 months to get paid, just because you're freelance. You know what I mean? So obviously that's not the case for everybody. I know that like people come in and are looking for certain things. They have certain goals. They have certain situations that they have to deal with. But if it's possible, you want to put yourself in a position where you get paid on time, you get paid for your work, and you're respected for your work. You know, so I think that's always something that you have to keep in mind.
Jeanette?
I'm pretty lucky in that I have a couple like permalance gigs that I do with video editing. So for like 3 days a week I'm at one gig, and 2 days a week I'm editing for another one. And so I haven't had a lot of periods of time where there's like a big gap in between, like, am I gonna have a project, am I gonna have work for this? But like, for example, I have the end of my contract with one of those gigs is coming up, and you know, I talk to people. I try to, you know, check in with people that I've worked with in the past, friends, you know, and see if they have anything going on, if they need anything. And, you know, start to look ahead, you know, before that contract's up. But yeah, I feel lucky that I haven't had like big gaps where I don't know if I'm going to get on to another project lately. So
I also think that you have to have diversity within your networks, because there's been times when I've had gaps, but I worked at places where they needed me for like 3 days. So, you know, like, and that was always what it was going to be. I was never going to work on something for a month with them, but it was always like a fallback option that if I didn't have these bigger projects, I knew that I had another part of my network where if I just needed like a couple of days to do stuff,
so that
was available. Out. Yeah. Or they would reach out to me and we would kind of like plan it out. We'd schedule it out because they knew that I had other things that I was doing. But I think that having diversity within the network is beneficial as well, because then you have options to kind of.
How do you create that diversity in your network?
For me, it was through other people that I knew that were freelancers. So sometimes I replaced people who couldn't do it, and they would refer me, and then I would be able to do the job, and then that was another part of my network that I could rely on. A lot of times it was just other freelancers helping other freelancers out. And I think that that's also important, is that your network isn't just employers, it's also colleagues. And, you know, if they have things where they need to crew up, they might ask you to be a part of the crew, and then you can build your relationships with a new employer that way as well. So I think, again, it's that diversity. It's not just employers, but it's also colleagues and coworkers that you can rely on, and you kind of build up your own team that way. And then you can get jobs through those means as well.
Yeah, I feel like I know people that I work with that I hire on a regular basis, and I think if I think of some of them, they were replacements for other people. Like a sound guy I work with all the time, I'm like, oh, he wasn't the person I hired in the first place, but the other guy got sick or something. With that in mind, like, because like Jeanette, I know, for example, your focus primarily has been cinematography, but now you're editing on a regular basis, and you guys all have, you know, multi skills sets that you practice in your work. So how do you stay up to date? Like, how do you refine your skills, you know, because when you're working a lot, you might not have the kind of time to see what's going on with software, to see what's going on with equipment. Like, do you allocate a certain amount of time for professional development? A lot of jobs, full-time jobs, they give give you professional development, but freelancers don't really get that as a byline. So do you make time for that? Are you able to make time for that?
With the position I have with Group 9 Media, I'm mainly an editor, but whenever there's gigs, like I literally overhear in the office people talking about a shoot that's coming up, and I'll try to jump on to be able to shoot on set. So for me, it's always, trying to place myself in an opportunity to keep shooting, because I do love shooting, even if it's in a different style than I would like to creatively for my own work, because personally for me, like being behind the camera in any capacity you do, tend to be able to keep up and learn the tech and keep up with the tech, because it's constantly changing. So for me, it's just jumping at any opportunity to be behind the camera.
Hannah?
I learn in a very hands-on way. So I find it very difficult to like go to my studio and like try out a new camera and learn it. If it's not like an actual, or there's actually some stakes in the situation. Otherwise it's like, I don't know, it just leaves my brain. So I have found, and this is probably makes it much harder than it needs to be, but I often find that I have to do it in the situation. And that's often how I learn, is when I have to suddenly, edit something in a new software, or when I have to use a new camera. And that works. It's like a sharp learning curve, and it's a painful one. But you learn it, you learn it really well, and you learn it really, really fast. So I would say that, I would say that for me, and I've talked to a lot of other women in this situation, but for me, shooting was very, very daunting. I directed and edited before I shot. And I was just like very aware that I didn't have like a technical background, and I didn't think that I had an aptitude for it. And I spent a very long time thinking that other people knew about it, and that it was like shooting was only accessible to people who were like reading the blogs all the time. And and I was like, I don't do that, so that means that I don't know this stuff. And again, I just speak to so many women that feel the same way. I think a lot of people find the tech part very daunting and inaccessible. So it was a really big deal for me that the film that I'm working on now is the first time that I shot everything. And again, sort of steep learning curve. But
so you're shooting this film that you're currently working. You shot all of it.
Yeah, and
Wow.
now I've actually almost completely transitioned from being an editor for hire to a shooter.
Wow.
And
it's amazing.
It's like, I don't know, I think for me, I was like, wow, the tech isn't just the thing. That was so you do have to get aptitude for it, because if you're shooting and you're stumbling with the camera, it's just really, really painful. But it just made me realize that it's so more doable than it seems.
Right.
I don't know.
Randy?
Just try to hire people that know more than I do.
Yeah.
If it's possible.
Right.
I mean, I don't really shoot anymore. I used to love shooting, but I stopped doing that because I was editing a lot, and also just wanted to focus on directing. And for me, editing was a gateway to directing more than shooting has been or was. But I always made sure that I had assistants that were technically more proficient than I was. So if I had a question, I could just go to him or her and just say, how do we figure this out? I used to be an assistant editor. I did it for years. But when I got into editing, I just focused on the creative side and kind of just like slacked off on the technical side. So, I mean, I just try to hire people in general that are smarter than me or are better at something that I'm not as good at, to make the circle complete as much as it can be. So, I don't spend time like doing development stuff or like going to a class to like learn. I know Avid, so I mean that's all that I really needed to learn at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've also learned that there's a certain level of confidence, like if I don't know a specific camera, and it is just kind of getting in there and doing it, but it's like, it's just going for it. And like if somebody asks you if you can shoot on a certain camera, and like you shot on others, you say yes, and you spend the night on YouTube watching tutorials on it. Yeah.
YouTube?
Yeah. Which is a thing that I've done multiple times, because it's like, if you know like the craft behind shooting something, like you can figure out the tech behind it as well. And
I also
there is
think
a balance, so don't like go in it completely blind, but yeah.
I also think it depends on the position. Like if if you're up for, say, something like an assistant editor position, you have to like know the technical side. Like you can't do the job without knowing the tech. So I think if that's the path that you want, it's better to take some kind of class. Yeah, take the time to learn some things. But I think if you're shooting is shooting, really.
Yeah.
So I
Once
mean,
you
you
know
can't
the
get
basics,
right.
yeah.
You can't get a tutorial. I mean, I know it. There's a learning curve, obviously, but ultimate, like if it's something with editing, is so like technically based more than like camera is when you think about it. The department that you're in, you have to. I think that you can kind of fake it till you make it.
First time I taught Premiere here, they called me and they said, "Hey, can you teach Premiere today?" And I'd used this software for approximately an hour. So I said, "Yeah, I totally, it's fine." And then I opened it and was like, "Oh, okay, I think I know what to do." And then came here and taught. And it's scary, but you kind of have to do it, you know.
I did that once with an After Effects class that you guys asked me to teach here.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
You did. So, Hannah, I had a specific question for you because I know since you do teach a lot of classes and you do a lot of sort of freelance education work, do you find that, and also a lot of your work is driven by grants and stuff like that, do you find that like your specific area of freelance as an educator is helpful in terms of like applying for grants? Like, is there a way, it's a tough question, but it's like, is there a way that you're able to use the freelance that you do to make, you know, your documentary proposals for grants like more appealing or more interesting?
Oh, interesting. I haven't thought about it that way. I think for me, teaching does a few things. One, it is like it's just a completely different space than I'm in when I'm editing or shooting and it's so wonderful. It's like just such a relief. I get to be around people, especially here at BRIC, a lot of people who are trying something out for the first time or who have like wanted to do a project for a while but haven't felt like they could. And it's just so refreshing for me to be around. And it like reminds me, it like re-excites me.
Is that because you're seeing people who are like new to it or?
Yeah, and people who aren't, you know, when you do something for a while, you take things for granted and you forget like how amazing it is. And you're watching people like discovering using a camera for the first time and you're like, wow. You know, so I think that like really helps me. On a simple level also, it is the most stable thing in the sense of something that I've done for a while that I don't do it that often. But it's like a constant thing that I have. And I think it's probably helpful for me to have one constant thing in my life. But I don't know if I've found that I'm more and more and more passionate about educating as I go on. But I don't know if with grants, it's, you know, grants are tricky. I don't know if people have applied for grants, but it's like a whole other skill set. It's like a whole other job.
Very different from filmmaking.
So different from filmmaking. And it's a bit of a complicated one. You have to sort of craft this thing and tell them about your project and yourself and why it's important. And it's a bit agonizing. But yeah, I think they're coming closer together, but most of the time in the grants, I just talk about how great my film is and why they should give me money.
Sure.
Yeah.
Jeanette, since you do a lot of nonprofit work, but you also mix that with production, do you have a preference in terms of, I know that a lot of the nonprofits that you work with, you're very passionate about, so does that help you show up for those kind of work? And how does that differ from moving from production to production?
Yeah, absolutely. The nonprofits that I've worked with have been film related, which is awesome. One of them's been in teaching with veterans, doing that. The other one I'm editing, and it's for a queer organization. And it really does help because when you're freelancing and you're hustling for work, sometimes it's like something you don't care at all about. And you need it for the money. It's just like any job. You need it for the money, but it's been really nice to work for nonprofits for things that I am passionate about. Yeah, I don't know. Yes,
That's
I
cool.
love working for nonprofits
Great.
because they actually do things that matter in this world. So it's a really nice feeling.
So there's sort of more value to that than, say, working on some random film that you don't necessarily have a strong connection to, because you did do that for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of those positions, it was like PA work and not treated well. And, you have to, like, I guess in the film industry, like, you have to pay your dues and you have to work up from that. And it's unfortunate that that's a thing. But yeah, I feel like it's something that you have to do, and it's a nice balance to have something that you care about.
Randy, you made the point earlier about, making sure you're working for people that are going to pay you on time, stuff like that. What do you do when all that is good, but the work that you're doing is not great, in the sense that you're not particularly passionate about it, or it's kind of a monotonous process to go about? Do you find a way in, or how do you approach that?
This might sound not nice or whatever, but I've never really been in that situation.
No, it's good.
Like, I've been blessed to be in situations where the projects that I worked on have been things that I've learned something from in one way or another. I haven't really been in a situation where I dreaded being there. I might have dreaded being there because I was, like, being overworked, and that part isn't fun. And I feel like you're being taken advantage of in a lot of ways. But the actual projects themselves, I've been fortunate to learn something or be exposed to things I didn't know about. So I'm not really sure what my answer is to that, because that
was your answer.
I mean, it's just,
so you
but I also try to,
something that's good about everything that you work on.
Right, and I try to, generally, and I try to find things that I can engage in, and I can be picky, because I don't want to just pick anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do want to have some passion for it. I do want to be interested in it. I want to have an energy level for it. So there are times when I might pass on something just because it doesn't interest me. And I think that it's okay to do that, if you're able to do that. So I guess for me, it goes back to, like, having a certain standard or having a certain interest in things. And I think that it's perfectly fine to do that if financially you're able to make decisions like that. And I know that's not the case all the time. But yeah, I've enjoyed everything that I've worked on, some more than others, obviously. But yeah, I've been pretty fortunate.
Cool.
So
great. How about for you guys?
Yeah, I think in even the worst gigs that I've had, I'm always trying to learn something, like, no matter what, even if that's don't do a gig like this again. Like, if there's a focus on, like, learn something from this gig. Like, I remember one time I was working on a music video, and they asked if I could do some rental, like, pickups in a van, I thought, and it turned out to be, like, I can't even remember. It was a box truck, whichever. I can't even remember how long it was, but it's the one, like, a pound short of having to have a Class B CDL. And I did that for 3 days, and it was the worst gig that I think I've ever had, but I learned to, like, ask more questions before you take the gig out of that. So, even in, like, the worst ones that you encounter, it's learning something about it, even if it's a negative experience. It's been really helpful for me.
Hannah?
I don't totally know how to answer that question. I think, for me, I don't know, I'm like, do I go into my whole rant? And I'm hoping not. But I think for me, like, a big thing is, like, where money comes from, and not wanting to participate in sort of companies or things that I don't believe in. And that's, like, very particular to me. I know for a lot of people that's not a huge thing. But so I feel proud, and this is not to say that advertising is a problem, but for me it's something that so I haven't done that stuff. And I think for me that I've been able to be in a space where, like, doing nonprofit work or doing independent film work, where I feel like, I don't know, like, I feel like I know why it's being made, and I sort of know why it matters. And that for me is a huge deal. And then I think I've also been able to be lucky where I haven't had to put myself in a position where I've had to do something that I really hated.
That for all three of you, that speaks to a certain amount of success, because I don't think you'd keep doing it, knowing all three of you, if it sucked. You know what I mean? So it's almost like having the principles to go, or perspective to go, like, this isn't for me. Like, being able to think beyond the paycheck, which is really hard to do, but maybe more where the paycheck is coming from, or the quality of the project, or the suckiness of the project.
I also want to be clear that, like, for the first, so I've been freelancing now for about 8 years, something like that. When you first start out, it's rough. You know what I mean? You're figuring it out, and you're doing things. You don't know exactly where you're going and exactly what space you're moving into, and you live on a shoestring for a long time, and it does take time. Like now I'm like pretty, I've been doing this for a while. I'm like, I have like you were talking about, so many things are referrals. You know what I mean? Like you live on referrals in your community, and you piece together little things and you figure out what works for you and you build a little system and a life, but it takes time, And I would say that I was flailing around for a good while there, So I think that's important to know, because I think in the first few years you have to have a bit of gumption, you know what I mean? You have to sort of not take, if you aren't quite finding your way, you have to not necessarily say, well, that's it,
Yeah, I mean, these are all things that like I learned like over time. It wasn't like something that I knew like right away. I mean, and I think you have to earn the respect of yourself and then create that standard. Like, what am I willing to put up with? Who am I willing to put up with? My professional pride. Is this a project that is something that I'm proud that my name is attached to, because that has value? Am I going to learn something? Because ultimately my goal is just to direct. So is this a project where I'm actually learning something that I didn't know prior to taking this job?
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
No, it's cool. And I think, again, I think it's okay to have like a certain standard for the jobs that you're going to work on, whatever those standards are. Like, I don't think you should just jump in anything just to jump at it, unless you're like very desperate in that moment. Then we're talking about something different. Right. But my name's attached to it in some form or fashion. So if I'm embarrassed, or I feel like I'm offending somebody, or I'm like, like pushing an agenda that I don't agree with, I'm not going to do it. Mm-hmm. I don't care if I'm broke for the rest of my life. There's just certain things I'm not going to do. Yeah. So
that's good. The other thing I was just going to say is that it sounds like this is the case for you. It's definitely the case for me, is that as you go along more, you get to choose more and more. Like that happens. I'm not sure I had a lot. Like, again, I was quite lucky. In the beginning, I wasn't doing work that was like really far. But I also wasn't doing work that is like the work that I am doing now, I see as my actual work. But you do get to choose more and more, and that's like so cool.
Choice. That's a great moment. We're gonna open it up for questions. We're gonna bring the house lights a little bit so that we can see folks. And Jessica Mason is gonna come around with microphone for anyone who has a question. So if you do have a question for our panelists, please raise your hand, and she will come over with the mic right here. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So it was great hearing you guys talk about everything from balance to like writing grants to, like I said, having that sense of self and what you're willing to do or not do. And
can you stand?
Oh, you want to stand? Sorry.
Thanks, Randy. I couldn't see.
So
no problem.
I'm involved in a lot of different projects, like from vocal music to theater, acting, and then I'm trying to work on like my own stuff too, everything from workshops, etc. So like I said, again, it was great hearing you guys talk about like that work balance to writing grants to what you feel like you're capable and okay with doing. So my question would be really, in the effort of trying to market yourself more and trying to gain more of a base of people to work with, how would you really recommend doing that in a way that you think will be received well and really shows you still, like who you are?
That's a great question. Do you guys want to?
I'm not gonna do it.
It's a big question,
But I mean, in like what capacity? Like, I'm not like.
I would say, like professionally, and to say, to show that there are certain things that I want to focus on. Like I said, I have vocal ability, acting ability, but I don't want to necessarily just say this is what I am, this is what I'm doing, this is one media, one section. But I also don't want to make it seem like I'm saying I'll just do everything, and I don't know anything. It's not true. Multiple things.
I will say I think the doing lots of things is more and more accepted now. So I think that is seen more and more as a bonus rather than as someone without a direction. So I think you can use that to your advantage. So I would try to be really. I think another big thing you do because like we're all ourselves in the world, right? So we're like, I'm Hannah, and you're like hiring Hannah, and like, and one of the big things that I've had to do is figure out how do I like stay really true to myself and also present myself as a person that somebody can make sense of and that I can show like my skills to. And I found that a bit of a rocky road. Like I'm still doing it, so I don't think there's an easy answer. I think you find a way to present yourself that you're comfortable with, and that feels true, but is also putting yourself out more than you might ordinarily do. I don't know. For me, I find it very hard to put myself out in the world and sort of, so that I've had to really, like being up here, I've had to like, I'm gonna talk and stuff.
Great job.
Thank you. So I don't know if that's sort of like, holistic vibey advice. I don't know the practical.
I have kind of a funny thought about Randy because Randy and I met on Twitter, and it's because Randy has basically my favorite Twitter presence. Because you don't tweet a lot about movies or like the hustle. You tweet about sports and you tweet about politics, and it was like this guy has interesting things to say. So I feel like, I mean, that's tangential, but it's also related because that's how we started connecting, is that and then Star Wars and then whatever else, you know what I mean? So like having a strong presence or a voice in a way that you seem to legitimately enjoy seems to be a good approach for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's my advice is if that's who you are, then that's what you present to people. And you don't think about all that other extraneous stuff. They're either going to accept it or they're not going to accept it. They're either going to use it to their benefit and see that you are a resource in a lot of different areas and they're going to take advantage of it, or they're going to miss out on an opportunity to have somebody that's diverse with his skill set and can provide a lot. So for me, you could probably tell by my answers, but I'm very much take it or leave it. I'm not really going to back down or cut down certain things because of the person that I am, and you want this and you want that and all that stuff. So you want to try to put yourself in a position where people appreciate the skills that you have and you're able to exploit them as much as you can. And in the same turn, if there's situations that you like or there are jobs that you like where you can only use like one part of your skill set, that's fine too. You don't have to be a jack of all trades all the time. So if there's one thing where you can use your vocal abilities, that's great. And then if there's something else that you do and there's another job that pops up where that's possible, then take advantage of that too. Sometimes you need a break from certain skills. You know what I mean? So, but don't ever compromise the fact that you bring all these skills to the table as well. That's who you are. That's the biggest asset that you bring to the table. So you have to take advantage of that whenever you have the opportunity to. So.
More questions? Des. Yeah, it's coming. Got to stand up too. Thanks.
What's going on? My name is Des. I just completed. I can't hear myself.
It's weird. You'll get used to it.
Yeah, I just completed my first short documentary with BRIC on the documentary intensive. And thank you. And kind of working on a bunch of different projects. But one thing I do notice, I'm doing a lot of run and gun, and my camera's constantly out. So I'm being approached by like everyone and their mother about trying to film something for them. So I always get asked kind of like, how much do I charge? So how did you guys determine your rates in the beginning? And what were the factors in determining your rates?
That's a great question. Yeah.
This is the hardest question.
I'm
of all
still
time.
terrible.
That's why I
at
didn't
this.
ask it.
Yeah.
Yes, come on.
I lowballed for so long until somebody I was working for was like, that's insane. But it took a long time. Money is like a weird, confusing topic for some reason. But we should all talk about it. And we should talk to fellow people about what they are charging and how they figured that out. I have some friends who do like extensive budgeting for their life, where they then say, this is what I would need to make, and therefore this is what I would need to charge for that. But I just ended up, right now I'm like in the middle of what people that are doing what I do charge. And I just know that from talking to people. And I know that, but I don't know. I would.
Yeah, my standard response, and I'm saying this, but I don't always do it, is like to tell people what I would charge. And it's usually like a standard, like industry rate or higher even. And then like if it's in an email or in person, it's like, well, I normally charge this, but what's your budget? Like I can work with your budget because, especially if you really do want to work with them, then you say like, but I can sort of work around your budget.
Do you ever throw out a much higher number because you A, don't want the gig, or B, you think you can get it?
Yeah, well.
Because I used to do that.
Yeah. If I don't want the gig, it's a really high number. And then if they say yes, I'll talk to them. Yeah.
I think you also have to think, do you own the camera? Yeah, then that automatically they're paying for that rental. So that's the baseline. So whatever you paid for that equipment, you factor that in with a certain percentage because you're providing two services. It's your service, and then it's the fact that you have this equipment and you don't have to go out and rent it. So, and do you have insurance on it? You charge them that too, because that's all a part of protecting your equipment. So you need to charge them the rental fee, what it would cost to cover insurance, and then your personal rate. So I don't know your experience level, so I can't really talk about the personal rate, but all of those things factor into it, and you should be able to communicate why the rate is what it is, and then they can make a decision. So don't shortchange yourself, especially if you've already like invested in yourself with the equipment. Like
And
that's
the
a big
time.
part of it. Like you're already at an advantage, so you have to make sure that you're like using that advantage to the fullest extent.
And I also think it's important to just be realistic, and I mean that positively. Like, don't take a low rate because you can. Take the rate that you have to live, and you have to live in Brooklyn now. You know what I mean? So you have to give yourself the benefit of the doubt about how much you should be making. Sorry, Hannah, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I don't remember.
Any more questions? Sure, right here in the front. Oh, do we get someone? Oh,
I'll come back.
okay.
Hi, my name's Kieran. Thank you for all the advice. I was curious, I'm kind of more on like the business side of it. So I was curious, is usually the funding coming from kind of the more corporate structured business side, or do you work with freelance like consultants and like that kind of business side too, if that makes sense?
For me, since I work with nonprofits and I work for Group 9, there's not a lot of money in nonprofits. But, I do branded content, editing. And so that, that is just plain old commercial work. It's making money for the dodo to shoot cute animal videos. So, like, while it's fun and it's chill, it is more the, like, mainstream business side for me. So, if that answers.
Mine is across the board. It's like everybody. Sometimes it's been corporate. Sometimes it's been independent financing. It's like literally across the board for me. So.
Do you have a different rate for each?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I'm also in the union, so I get a standard union rate and a lot of overtime money, just because I'm in a union, so that's the benefit of being in it. But if it's a non-union thing, then I try to be as close to my union rate at this point as possible, because I worked hard to get to where I'm at, so it should be reflected that way. So it's everybody. I've kind of worked with all kinds of crazy stuff. So.
Sorry, was the question, where do we make our money?
No, more of like the people who are like planning or doing like the budgeting, things like that, like the business side of it.
Yeah.
Are they freelancers as well, or are they typically like 9 to 5 full time, like that kind of thing?
Do you mean the people that are doing my business side, or people that are doing business as freelance?
You mean like producers and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, mine is across the board. So like the producers are freelancers too. Like they're jumping from job to job and they're trying to get a job just like I'm trying to get a job. Sometimes it's like a big media corporation, so it's just a bunch of suits and this is
For a big media corporation.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you encounter people who kind of play that role as a freelancer, or is it typically?
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
If there was that, I would be so excited. I don't encounter that many people that are freelancing in that way.
Yeah.
But that would be, I mean, I think that there definitely are for feature films and But I think that would be definitely a role out there that a lot of people would be really excited about.
Yeah, if you want to like get in, if you want to like jump in, if you can learn how to be a good producer, like you could be working for the rest of your life. Like it seems like that's what you're asking about. Like if you could be a good freelance producer, you have a job for life, because that is the toughest position for somebody to like hire and actually do a good job. You will also be the most unpopular person in the project because nobody likes producers when you're on the crew side. Well, you're the bad guy. No, you're the bad guy. Okay. Like you're essentially, or a bad woman, like because you're the money person. Okay. You know, and like people feel like you're not paying them enough, or like your job is to protect the production and make sure that you're under budget. And nobody in the crew wants to hear that. They want to get paid what they think they want to be paid. But you will always get a job if you're good at being an independent producer, because there are not that many good ones, especially in New York. So if like that's the thing that you want to pursue, you will have a job for the rest of your life.
Looking for a producer.
Yeah, always.
Because I don't want to do it.
What do they do? Like, you know.
That's probably a larger.
That's a much larger topic.
And it's quite nebulous.
Yeah,
it's
very on different projects. Alice.
Hi. So I was curious about making my own independent film. I feel like I'm averse to making other people's films, and that's what I want to go into. And luckily, I have something on the side that I can fall back on that's steady. But would I, or do you guys usually work with crews, and how do you put those crews together, especially for grants? I assume that's how independent projects get done usually. So.
How do you guys put together crews for larger scale projects or for projects of your own?
For my own projects, it's friends. You know, it's people that I've met on other sets that I trust, because it's so hard to bring somebody on that's completely random. You know, recommendations are even scary. So it's really people that you've worked with before that you trust that I always try to use. I can't say in terms of like huge, or well, not even huge, but bigger projects and funding. It's not something that I have a lot of experience in, so I can't really speak to that. But crews, definitely, it's people that I know and trust.
You probably are the best one to speak. I work on my own. I work on my own a lot. I shoot by myself. I shoot my films by myself. So, but then again, it's like everything in my experience. Everything in the film world is community based. So you meet people, you work with people. You know what I mean? And the sort of the life work is all very intertwined. So you end up having this whole pool of people that are friends, but also colleagues, and you make a little world.
Yeah, I start with like a core. So I have my DP. Like I bring my DP with me wherever I can. I also have a producer now that I trust and knows what I want in a crew member. Like I don't want jerks, and I want as talented a person as possible. So I trust her that she knows what I want and that she'll go out and get the recommendations. She works on a lot of different stuff, so her network is pretty vast. But I try to go with my core as much as I can, and then I build out from there. There's certain positions that I just need to know who that person is and have an intimate relationship with. And my DP and I went to NYU together, so it started there. It's also people that I worked with on Spike's projects, because obviously they're really talented and know how to work at a certain level. If they can't do it, I ask them for recommendations. So a lot of it is trust, but the core people are people that I'm familiar with, that I'm comfortable with, that I know that they're talented, and then I build out around that. So my thing is have a team and have as vast a team as possible, and then fill in from there. So
I think having a team and no jerks is the perfect place to end this for the evening. Thank you guys so much for coming out.
Thank you, Liam.
Thank all of you for coming out. This has been great. Thank you so much. We are finished for the evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Liam. Good questions, Liam.
If you don't mind clearing out as quickly as possible, I'm sorry we have another shoot in here, but we might be outside for a couple minutes at the end. Thank you. That was great. get you guys all a copy of this.